Hello everybody and welcome to Rest and Reason. I'm RP the Red Panda and today we're going to be, as promised, looking at Dune Imperium. Now, I'm sure that you all are wondering who won the competition and I will let you guys know that at the end of the video. But for now, I'm going to actually be looking at one of the comments as well as many of my comments on this game. And this is yet another one in my Fixer Upper board game, or What's Wrong with This Board Game and How to Fix It series. Now, as always, I want to make the disclaimer that this series isn't saying that this is an absolute fact. This is me from my experience as a board game developer, a professional board game developer, saying these are some things that didn't seem quite right about the game, and here's how I would fix it. It's a love letter to the game. So, let's go ahead and look at what is the main feel of Dune Imperium. Now, Dune Imperium honestly feels like you're one of the big leaders of the factions in Dune, of the houses in Dune. And you honestly feel kind of like you're participating in the movie. The only part of it that doesn't feel like you're participating in the movie is that you can't kill other characters. Aside from that, it feels a lot like the Dune universe, and I was quite impressed with how thematic this game was, despite being a very big Euro game, and a lot of times big Euro games don't feel real thematic because there are so many interesting mechanics that don't quite line up, but this game did really well lining those up so that you really feel like you are in the Imperium of the Dune universe. Now, the way that it does this main mechanic is through engine deck building. Now, this differs from regular engine building because regular engine building is a lot more systematic and plannable, whereas engine building with deck building put together into this marriage makes for a very unique game experience where you are building your engine and getting better and better stuff as you go, but the difference is the old stuff that wasn't very good is still attached to the engine. So I like to think of it as an original engine builder. You're throwing out the old engine for a new engine, but you're only keeping small pieces of the schematic of the old engine. Whereas in an engine deck builder, you're literally building the engine on top of it. So it'd be like strapping rockets to a car and calling it a spaceship. You still have all the old clunky stuff that really doesn't work with the spaceship, but works with the car. And it's kind of the same way. Your deck will eventually have a bunch of cards in it that just don't work with the rest of your engine or barely work with the rest of your engine. And this makes for a really interesting tension. This game, despite having many strengths, does have some primary weaknesses. Now, engine deck building, I will totally admit, has more adaptability than normal engine building. Normal engine building is supposed to feel like a snowball going from the top of the hill and getting bigger and bigger as you go down until it hits whatever target you're going for. Whereas deck building engines are a little different because you do always have that element of the luck of what cards are you going to get in your hand. Are you going to get your better cards or your old bad cards? Or maybe some cards you bought just for points or other purposes. And so I do realize that there's a lot of adaptability to this game. Despite that, it's still an engine builder. And engine builders aim for you to feel like you can strategize well into the future. This is called tactics. Tactical thinking is thinking ahead, planning ahead. Adaptation is saying, oh, in the moment, what random things should I do? And an engine deck builder, you should be adapting to what's coming out of your cards, but you should be tactically able to plan ahead with your movements to eventually get these turns where you just go, wow, everything came together the way I envisioned in my head. And Dune Imperium doesn't do this very well, and there's one primary reason for this, and that's the Intrigue deck. The original Intrigue deck in the game has so many cards in it that are either too weak or too powerful that it makes the game difficult to play. Let's look at a few of them right here. First off, we've got these conflict cards. Now, you're going to notice right away that there's problems with these conflict cards. First, there are 5 of them, and there are 40 intrigue cards. That means that if you were to draw 8 intrigue cards, you would supposedly get only one of these out of 8. It's not very high chances. On top of that, if you get these ones, great. Those are amazing cards. But if you get this one, you have to pay 2 spice to get 1 extra sword compared to that card. So if somebody gets this card, by pure luck, they have gotten a significantly better card than this one. Just by pure mathematics. And then this card, thankfully, gives you a few extra swords, but you're still having to pay this, and you have to fulfill this extra requirement. All of which you don't need for these cards, so you'd feel somewhat unlucky with these, and a little unlucky with this, but you'd feel super lucky getting one of these 2 cards, 2 out of 40. And that in of itself isn't a good feeling. On top of that, you've only got 5 cards in the entire Intrigue deck that do victory points. Now, that's again a problem, because that means if you draw 8 cards, you should only be able to draw 1 of these. That means that somebody else could just buy 1 card, get super lucky, and you could buy 7 or 8 cards and still only get 1 of these. In addition to this, some of them are better than others. This one, you have to lose certain stuff in a conflict. That's not too difficult to do. Whereas that's 4 spice. That's as much as one of the biggest actions on the board. And then this one's $7. That's almost a whole extra worker's worth of work. These 2 endgame bonuses are the worst part, though. Right from my first playthrough of this game, I found that getting these could mean the difference between winning and losing, and there are 2 of them in a 40-card deck. 2 in 40 cards. I say that over and over because that is ridiculously small odds, which means if somebody gets the ridiculous luck to get one of these cards, they get a huge leg up by getting basically the royal flush in poker. And this game isn't supposed to feel like that. In fact, these intrigue cards are supposed to feel like powers, like little bonuses that help you with your plan, not things that suddenly make you super powered beyond belief that nobody else can beat. And so that was one of the best examples of how this didn't work. And this all comes down to balance. They didn't balance out a lot of these cards. And I remember somebody saying in one of my discussions about this game that this game felt like a rough draft. And I think in a lot of ways it doesn't. It's got beautiful art. It's got a lot of really good mechanics working together. But the area it feels like a rough draft is in those intrigue cards and on these faction cards. So let's go ahead and look at some of the imbalance here. This girl allows you to go to 2 different types of spaces, even if somebody else has gone there. Whereas this guy just lets you look at 1 card on the top of your deck. You can already see that that's a huge disparity, but wait, it gets worse. This girl lets you take something from the market and make it so no one else can buy it, and then only you can buy it, and you can buy it for $1 less. Whereas this guy just lets you grab 1 card from his deck. You can see that these are 2 very big differences, and this girl is clearly the better of the 2. But the weirdest part about this is she is supposedly a harder person to play, whereas he is supposedly an easier person to play. Now, I have watched many different levels of players play this game, and from what I can tell, she's just better for everybody. A beginner gets her because it's super easy to use her powers, and an experienced player dominates with her a lot of times because it's just such a great power. And I found other people around the table were constantly going, ooh, that's such a good power, and they were jealous of this better power because it was objectively better. And so these discrepancies make the game less what I think it was aiming to be. Yes, Dune is a world of chaos, but it's not a world of actual chaos. The chaos is people meticulously planning their intrigue, making moves in subtle ways and in back rooms. It's not about random things happening. In Dune, almost nothing random happens. In fact, part of the Dune series is the fact that this guy can foresee every single thing that's going to happen, basically. So the fact that the game itself plays more like a game of poker where you're just begging for the right person to start the game with and the right intrigue cards doesn't make the game feel correct. My changes have to do primarily with those two things, and then with a few other side things. With the intrigue cards, the solution was simple. I tier listed the intrigue cards, and I might make a video of this in the future, and I said which ones were the best, which ones were the worst, and then I tried to take out anything that wasn't in the top tiers. I then took out all 5 of these victory point cards. Just took them out entirely. It's just too unfair that a 1 in 8 chance somebody's going to get super lucky and get points for the game, and most of the rest of the time everybody else is just going to get unlucky and not get any points from them. And then same with the combat cards. I didn't take out all the combat cards. I just took out the ones 4 swords and above. Because these ones I found didn't make it fun where, oh, I had this one card that happened to get me a little bit above you. They'd come out with these giant, massive cards that would just make it go from this person planned really well and beat you fair and square, but now you're coming in and basically cheating the luck by getting one of these 1 in 8 chance cards. That's just not a fun feeling when somebody comes in with that level of luck and you didn't get that level of luck. So I took those cards entirely out of the game, and I have a full list of the cards I took out of the Intrigue deck down in the description in my, there's a link to the rules on this variant, so you can go look at those, and it gives a full list of all the Intrigue cards I took out. I also created these faction powers that actually worked with both the theme of the game and also evened out the power. So for example, with her, instead of having her be able to go to both of those types of spaces and get to save a card and buy it for 1 less, I made her power so that she could go to 1 type of space for cheaper, and she could save a card but not get it for 1 less dollar. This all around made her a better player, and also made her power actually more thematic, because this person in the lore is actually a money-focused person, not a Dune-focused person. And for some reason, they included Dune spaces on her thing, when, from what I understand, I don't think she ever went to Dune in any of the books ever. So it doesn't make any sense, but it does make sense that at the very least her family would have something to do with the spice trade or money. So that seemed to make more sense. So all around, I evened these out. And what I realized was that at the beginning of the game, I would recommend you give them 2 people from the same family. So in this case, the 2 Riches from House Riches. You give them the 2 from Riches, and then they choose one of these 2. They're both very similar, but a little bit different. And whenever you do that, you then will get their house goal. Now, this is to replace those very lucky intrigue cards that gave you victory points, because I didn't want to get rid of the idea that you could get victory points from cards. But what I did instead was have these bonuses, which are called house goals. The house goals are specifically tailored to what that group was trying to do. So, for example, House Riches was well known for spoiling their children, for trying to elevate their children with money and power to make them bigger and higher up than other people and have more things than other people. So I have them spend $8 to get a victory point, representing them spoiling their kids as a goal of their own that they achieved. And for each one of the factions, I made one of these cards. Now, these goals would be out in the open. You would put them directly on top of your faction, just like this. And everybody would be able to see that throughout the game, that that is the thing that the whole Empire knows. These guys aim for this. So they're probably going to do stuff that tries to get them this. I also created, for those end-of-game goals, 8 different end-of-game bonus goals. Now, at the beginning of the game, how I would do this is I would take these 8 goals, and I would allow the person who's played the game the least to choose first. They get to choose, do they want to pass and go first on the first turn, which as we all know is a big deal? Or do they want to be able to choose which two of these they're going to get to choose from? If they choose to take one of these, what they're going to do is they're going to take two of them, they're going to choose one of them and discard the other one. And the reason they're going to do that is, A, it keeps one of those goals from other people. B, it makes it so that people don't know which one they chose. Even though the next person's going to be looking at all of these going, okay, I know they got one of these two, they won't know which one they got. And they may never know. And so you do that for the second person, you do that for the third person, and if somebody passed, they would get the leftovers, they'd just get a random one. They wouldn't get to choose, they'd have to just draw one, and that would be their one. That would be their punishment for going first. So it helps outweigh that advantage that the first player gets. That is how I account for both the intrigue cards and the factions. There were a few small other modifications I made that I'm really quickly going to cover, and I lumped them all into something called the market board. So it's right down here, it's the market board, and basically what this is, this just makes it so that if you are unlucky enough not to get to a certain resource, or if you just have a pile of worthless resources, you can always transfer them into other resources for the most part. And we found that this made the game a lot more fun and also made it a lot less tense because you didn't have to think 7 turns ahead. You could think 2 or 3 turns ahead instead. The Imperium deck is now going to slowly phase cards out. So at the beginning of the game, 5 cards are going to start in the old cards section. People are going to buy from it. New cards are going to come up and go into the new card section. And then let's say the round ended here. These cards would slide down to the discount card section, and these ones would slide down to the old card section. And any new cards that come out this next round would go up here. Now, as you can see, the discount cards are $1 less. This helps make it so that if there's a really expensive card, maybe like him, that's decently expensive, somebody's not buying that, this will make it so that hopefully that will go. But if it doesn't, let's say another turn passes and none of these sell, all of these would get discarded from the game. This helps make it so that you have to go right in and buy those cards that you want before they're gone. And it helps it so that no card sits there forever and ever and ever because nobody wants it or nobody can afford it. Now, the other change I made was that instead of having a whole pile of these Arrakis liaison cards, I made it so that there was one type of card from every faction type. All 4 of them. This makes it so that at the beginning of the game, the Fremen don't have a giant advantage. Because in the original game, you can just buy tons of these that will help you with that strategy for the rest of the game. But all of these other ones, you have to wait to get lucky enough to see one of them. This makes it so that the most basic card of all 3 is there for you to take right from the beginning. The final change that I made had to do with those strategies. So right over here, I have a little web made. Basically what this web means is there are 15 Freeman cards, including these ones. There are 15 Bene Gesserit cards, including those ones. There are 10 Emperor and 10 Space Guild cards, including these ones. So, just like in the books, obviously the Bene Gesserit is one of the biggest, most important factions in the game. So I figured, yes, it does make sense that they have more cards. But they had so many more cards than the Spacing Guild and the Emperor that those 2 factions basically never won. I had an entire game where I aimed for these guys and only these guys to buy their stuff, just for the fun of it. And it was basically impossible, because the few of them that did come up, other people would just randomly buy. Whereas when I played the Bene Gesserit, I won big time, because they are such a strong faction. The Fremen won big time, such a strong faction. So I lowered these to 15, and I made it so that these guys have a fighting chance right at the beginning by you being able to buy these. So those are my main changes. There is one optional change I'd like to suggest, and this was suggested to me by somebody named Tyler Blanchard. He was down in the comments, and he said, I would love to see Dune as a game where you could fight over several different spaces. And I was like, wow, that would be pretty cool. And I was like, how can I do this without making it super difficult? And I came up with a pretty simple solution, in my opinion, having 3 different combats, 1 for each level of the cards. So if you want to play with this expansion, I would suggest you only play with it, A, if you've played Dune Imperium quite a bit, and B, if you like the conflict element of Dune Imperium a lot. Now, if you win this conflict, you'll get this one, you get that one, and this one, you'd get this one. Each of these conflicts would work independently. If you tied, both players or all players who tied would get nothing. So this represents that you're fighting maybe not even just on Dune, you're fighting maybe all over the galaxy, small little things and big conflicts for different rewards, because it didn't make any thematic sense that the loser of a battle got stuff. That's not how any fantasy or real world thing works. If you lose a battle, you get nothing. That's how that works. So if you are sending soldiers to the conflict, you choose which one of the 3 you send it to. If you're putting down your swords at the end of the game, I'm just going to use these to show the example. You would add up your swords, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's equal to 4 soldiers. You'd take 4 soldiers from your supply, and you'd put them on whatever conflict you wanted. Those are my changes. I know there's a lot of them. And before I get into the final score and stuff, I actually want to announce the winner of this. And the winners is a Mr. Kocher. I probably mispronounced it. It's Kocher. And this was a really, really close competition. I went back and forth. I wasn't sure who was going to win. And in the end, it was just a very slight win for Mr. Kocher. So congratulations. If you could comment underneath a way that I can contact you to ask you for your your address so I can send the game to you, I would really appreciate that. Like I said, I will handle all of the expenses for that. As for everybody else, I want to give a huge honorable mention to Tyler Blanchard. As I pointed out, you had a really great comment here on Dune, and I made sure to put that in my variant rules. I gave you credit for the idea because I just thought it was such a great idea. So, the original score for this game was actually a 3.4, which isn't too bad of a score. It's a silver recliner, in fact. It's a general recommendation. I would generally recommend this game without any of my changes. This game, with my small modifications, goes up to a 4.1 out of 5. And that right there is a gold recliner. I would say that with my small changes, or even just a few of my changes, this game would pretty easily rise up to a all-around, I would say just about any board gamer would benefit from owning this game. The only person I could think of who wouldn't want this game would be somebody who absolutely hates any idea of there being conflict at all. If you don't like any idea or inkling of there being a conflict, this isn't the game for you. But otherwise, even somebody who doesn't like conflict very much, like my mother or my wife, enjoyed this game. So I would say that this is one of the greatest of all time heavy board games after my changes. It is just an amazing game, thematically enriching, so much fun to think through. There are so many different strategies even I haven't been able to try, and with my changes there are even more things to try. And I'm just so excited to keep exploring this as I go on. I would love to hear in the comments any games that you would like to hear me do in the future. I would love to hear in the comments if you agree or disagree with my thoughts. Like I said, I want that to be a place where we can all discuss what we think about board games. And please make sure to join my faction so that my influence can grow in the Imperium of YouTube, and eventually my house can ascend to the Imperiorship. Or, I just happen to get more people to converse with. That also would be amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, and join us next time on Rest and Reason.